We are here today to present you the Horizon 2020 framework, and in particular the opportunities for SMEs to apply for specific call for proposals and leverage the financing that has been set aside by the European Commission specifically for small and medium enterprise. These are the items that we plan to touch on today. We'll talk a little bit about what happened in terms of SME participation in the previous framework, FP7, and also what we can learn from that. We'll look at an overview of the framework available, not only Horizon 2020, but also Eureka, Eurostars, and COSME. And then we will look at the details. How do you find the right information on these frameworks, the calls, the topics? How long does it take to apply for a project? When do you get the funding? We'll try to debunk a few myths for those of you who have not applied to EU financing. We will talk about the project maturity and the match between the maturity of your technology, your company, and the type of instruments that you should be looking at. And then we will address the new SME instrument that has been designed specifically for the Horizon 2020 framework. Don't leave before the end, because we will address key advices on project applications at the end of this presentation before going into the Q&A session. So starting with what happened in the previous framework, the target for the contribution of SMEs to the program was set by the European Commission to 15%, and they actually did a little bit better with 16.7%. But the bar has been raised once more, and the target for Horizon 2020 will actually be 20%. Now, the contribution of SMEs has changed over time, and also between the type of themes, what you call thematic priorities. From this chart, you can see that the European Commission has put more emphasis on the participation of SMEs after 2011-2012. You can also see that programs like NMP, the Manufacturing Nanomaterial Program, has always had a very high contribution from the European Commission for SMEs. And the Commission has learned from that and tried to apply the rules that have been used in NMP in order to maximize the SME contribution. For example, using specific call topics where the consortium have to have a minimum contribution from SMEs. A quick question about what is really an SME. How do you qualify as an SME? First of all, you need to be engaged in an economic activity, and that could create problems for pre-revenue startups who don't have any customer revenues and are mostly using public funding to grow. In this particular case, you need to convince the validation team at the European Commission that you do have an economic activity, and it could take the form of unpaying customers or other types of business development activities. So keep that in mind to make sure that you can qualify. There's also an issue of size. SMEs need to have less than 250 employees, but also the turnover needs to be less than 50 million euro, or the total balance sheet has to be less than 43 million euros. Now, these numbers may have to include companies who own the SME or subsidiary of the SME. That all depends on the percentage. If that percentage is over 25%, then most likely you'll have to include the upstream company or the downstream company in the overall perimeter in order to calculate the number of employees, turnover, and the balance sheet. So keep in mind those rough numbers, and obviously there is a team in charge of validating SMEs at the European Commission. It's also said that the procedure for validating SMEs will become simpler than before, where it had to be done by the specific team at the European Commission called the REA validation team, and that will most likely change. Now, what is Horizon 2020? It's the new framework program following FP7. It will last for 7 years and has a budget of 70 billion euros. The budget is split between 3 different pillars that are illustrated on that picture. Pillar number 1 is excellent science and is focusing more on the funding of individual researchers and also very advanced technology research, so-called FET program, Future and Emerging Technologies. The frameworks which are very interesting for SMEs are in the Pillar 2 and 3. Pillar 2, Industrial Technologies, includes specific instruments for SMEs, but also the program which used to be called ICT and NMP. So essentially everything about IT, nanotechnology, manufacturing, etc. Then we have the 7 societal challenges of the 3rd pillar. And this includes work program around health, energy, environment, security, etc. So the thematic priorities that used to be in FP7 are still there, but they may have been renamed and allocated to these different pillars. If you combine the budget of the societal challenges and the industrial leadership, then 20% of the budget will be allocated specifically to SMEs, which amounts roughly to 8.65 billion euros. So there's a lot of funding available for SMEs who know where to apply and how to apply for EC financing. In fact, the European Commission has consciously tried to increase the opportunity by creating new instruments, and we'll have a few words about those later, simplifying the application process for these new instruments, but also creating synergies with other funding sources which are also focused on SME. For example, the competitive program for SMEs, COSME. In short, the European Commission wants to make Horizon 2020 the most SME-friendly EU support program in history, and they're certainly very ambitious compared to what was in FP7, but there are a lot of things that have moved in the right direction, as we will see later. Let's have a quick look at the different funding schemes. The biggest one is Horizon 2020, which before was FP7 and now will be called Horizon 2020 with 70 billion euros. You can see here that the Horizon 2020 is also moving a little bit on the right in terms of the maturity of the technology, which means that Horizon 2020 is not only about research, pure research, it's also about demonstration and implementation. And that's also something quite new for the program. In parallel to this program, there are other programs which are focusing on SMEs. One of them is the Eureka program and one of its sub-program, Eurostars, which used to have 400 million euros of funding, but that budget will triple for the next program starting 2014. In that particular framework, it's always research performing SMEs who are leading the consortium, and in most countries they need to be there to be able to, for the consortium to access funding. Finally, there is a framework that used to be called CIP, Competitiveness and Innovation Program, that is now moving to COSME, but also part of it will be folded into the Horizon 2020 work program. That framework is more about market replication. So here, we're not talking about research anymore, we're talking about an existing prototype or product, and the funding is used to replicate, to deploy that product on the market. Obviously, the level of contribution is also lower because we are closer to market. So the percentage of funding compared to the cost is lower. We'll discuss a bit of that later. If we look at the hurdles for SME participation, there was an interesting survey done in 2013 on about 600 SMEs, and 4 main hurdles appeared and were described. First one is quality of information. The existing Cordis website is not always easy to navigate, and it is difficult to understand the application procedures. Number 2 was the application timeline. The time to grant for most of these frameworks is quite long, which is not, of course, ideal for SMEs who are looking for short-term opportunities, and the negotiation procedure are quite complex. Number 3 was the issue of technology maturity. FP7 has a strong focus on research rather than technology and demonstration, which is more interesting to SMEs who are, by definition, closer to market. And finally, the topics described in the previous framework were always done using a top-down approach with a list of topics. And that means the SME had to fit into the topic line to be able to apply. Now, these 4 hurdles have been addressed in Horizon 2020 so that it becomes simpler and more effective for SMEs to file project applications. The previous website, Cordis, you most likely have seen it. It's quite complicated to navigate. You have to go through a search engine which lists a large number of calls, not always easy to filter by categories, and of course a lot of acronyms which you may or may not be familiar. The new portal, on the other end, is streamlined. This is a beta version that will be open to the public shortly. And you can see here a very simple list of topics which are illustrated by little cards with colors. The search engine, which shows you the different categories organized around the 3 pillars. And when you search for something and of course return a couple of options, for each of these topics you'll be able to see directly online the call summary, the specific challenge and scope of the topic, as well as the eligibility and evaluation criteria. Before, you would have to go through a list of PDFs, you have to download them, and you have to dig into the PDFs to find out all of that information. Now everything is actually put online on the web pages without having to search through documents. So that's something that will definitely help. The project application timeline has historically been quite long, usually between 9 to 12 months between the time where you submit your applications and the time when you will receive the pre-financing to start the project. Now, in Horizon 2020, there has been discussion to reduce the negotiation part of the process. And that is a very important change, because if we cut out the negotiation, it means that there will not be any back and forth on the description of work. Now, the good thing about that will be the reduction in time to grant, which is good for everyone. But the negative impact will be that the evaluators will be forced to even be stricter on the applications, because they won't be able to put recommendations for improving description of work, simply because there will not be any discussion of description of work during the negotiation. So we have to be a bit careful. It might mean shorter time to grant, which is good, but also necessity to have an even more perfect application than before, which is challenging. Now, regardless of the time that it will take, whether it's 12 months, 9 months, or 6 months, there are a few things you need to be aware of. First of all, the evaluation of the project always comes 9 to 12 weeks after submission. That's really important, because it means that within 9 to 12 weeks, you actually know if and when your project will start. Simply because when you receive the ESR, the Evaluation Summary Report, with the mark, you know that within 2 weeks you'll be invited to negotiation. And if you are invited to negotiation, well, you know that you win the financing. It's very, very uncommon that projects invited to negotiation don't manage the process. So there is good visibility. You can start recruiting and prepare the start for this project. Also, the funding you will receive at project start is quite substantial, generally between 50 and 60%. So there is really no need to advance cash. The only part which comes later is, of course, at the end of the project, around 10 to 15% of the funding will come only after completion of the project. In fact, the period between the evaluation summary report and the pre-financing can be used by the companies to ramp up the project, and that is very important for SMEs because naturally they may not have the personnel available for this project and they have to plan this ahead. So SMEs should not be afraid of that long process. There is visibility and there is time to staff, and the money all comes up front. Now, there are a few myths around EU funding which have been the reasons why a lot of SMEs have decided not to pursue these opportunities. One of them is about the financing coming up very late. And as I was describing, that time to grant will be reduced, but also, in any case, the money comes up front, so you should not have to advance any cash. So that's really not an issue. But of course, as an SME, if you are planning to start a project within 3 months, it's very likely that these frameworks will not be a good match because they just take time to enter in action. Another myth is the reporting overhead linked to EU projects. And certainly, there is reporting to the European Commission during the project phase and at the end, but that reporting is usually done by the project coordinator, which is unlikely to be the SME because the project coordination is generally given to large companies, research institutes or universities. So if you are a partner in the consortium, you have a duty to report some activity to your project coordinator. You also have a financial report every 12 or 18 months, but that's about it. And provided you have the basic infrastructure in place, which means simple cost tracking and time reporting, the amount of overhead is not high. Finally, there's been sometimes confusion about what does the EU financing means. Well, it's not a loan. The EU doesn't take any equity in your company, and the EU doesn't own the IPR that you develop. So it is really a grant. You get the money, and provided that you deliver the results in the description of work, and you contribute to the dissemination of project results, you are entitled to that funding, and it will remain with the company. The IPR will be split between the different partners of the consortium, depending on the agreement between those partners. But the general rule is that the components are owned by the companies who have developed them. Now, one of the areas where the European Commission has paid a lot of attention for Horizon 2020 is the development stage for companies. FP7 has been very focused on research and naturally driven by universities and research groups. But a lot of projects may not have resulted into commercial results, unfortunately. Now, SMEs usually commercialize their products supported by private investors like business angels or venture capital firms. But there is a gap in between those two stages, research and commercialization. And that funding gap is something the European Commission seeks to address specifically with that program. Now, companies like ZAS Ventures can support a company at any of these stages, whether it's research, development, or commercialization. But for this presentation today, we'll focus a bit more specifically on that funding gap and the instruments that can cover your development just before you have to raise private capital. The concept used by the European Commission to decide about the funding rates is something called the Technology Readiness Level Index, TRL. Depending on where you are on the TRL index, you will receive a percentage which will be low or high. So if we take, for example, Horizon 2020, there are two main classes of instruments. One is focusing on research and innovation and has a low TRL, so meaning technology which have not matured yet into a product that may have not been tested in the field. And for this, the funding level will be 100%. There is another class of instrument focusing on innovation, closer to market, technologies that may have been tested in the field but needs to be deployed in production, for example, or demonstrated at a larger scale. And for that, the funding level will be 70%. If we look at the other frameworks, Eureka, Eurostars, and the Eureka cluster calls will sit somewhere in between those two instruments. In Eureka, you need a certain level of research, but also technology that will go to market within 2 years of the project completion. The funding level is variable. It really depends on the countries involved in the project. So it can be anywhere between 50 and 80%. Finally, programs like COSME are focusing on market replication. Here we're talking about existing products that need to be deployed in the field at a large scale. And there's also funding available for those, but with a lower funding contribution, usually 50%. There is something new in Horizon 2020, and that's the SME Instrument. It's been designed to really help SMEs with limited funding to come up with innovative ideas and get early funding for that. It's organized in 3 stages. In stage 1, you are expected to submit a 10-page business plan, which will be used to assess your application. And all the companies approved will receive a lump sum of 50,000 euro in order to cover the development of a more advanced business plan. The Commission expects about 10% success rate. It will of course depend on the number of applications because they have a set budget for this. But what's important here to understand is that this will be for SMEs only, and it's a single entity that will apply for that funding, not a consortium. Once you finish with stage 1, you can use the output, the advanced business plan, to submit to stage 2. Stage 2 is using the business plan, developing it further, but also creating activities around prototyping, testing, scaling up, and so on. The funding is much larger, between 500,000 euro up to 5 million euro. And here, a single entity can apply. It has to be an SME. But you can also have partners joining. The success rate is expected to be between 30 and 50% for that stage. Finally, in stage 3, there are no direct funds available for this, but the EC expects to create some matchmaking between the best projects and venture capital or other types of public funding or private funding. So this is quite new, and it's been implemented in different parts of the work program. So the SME Instrument, you will find it in different work programs. So you can see 5 examples in the health program, in the transport program, in the ICT program, and in the NMP program. The amount of money and the amount of reimbursement for each may differ by work program. So for example, in ICT, in stage 2, it's expected that an amount of between 500,000 euro to 2 million euro would be good enough, with a contribution of 70% from the Commission. But in the health work program, you could envision larger projects because, for example, you need to run some clinical tests. In that case, the funding could go up to 5 million euros, and also possibly the contribution could be also higher than 70%. This will be defined more precisely in the work programs that are to be published on December 11. There is another instrument I would like to mention called Fast Track to Innovation. That instrument is also an open instrument, so you can submit any idea you want. But it is a mini cooperative program, so you have to respond with a mini consortium up to 5 entities, and the budget available is no more than 3 million euro by project. So these are 2 different new instruments. The SME Instrument is focusing on SMEs, obviously, and in stage 1 it's a single applicant. Stage 2 should be a single applicant as well, but could be other partners joining. including non-SMEs. But the Fast Track to Innovation is a small consortium. For both, it's a continuous submission with 3 cutoff dates. The SME Instrument will start in 2014. Stage 1 cutoff should be between March and June. Stage 2 cutoff should start around November. For Fast Track to Innovation, the first cutoff dates are not expected before 2015. Now on to tips and how to create a successful proposal. The first thing you have to do when creating a proposal is the consortium. And the balance of the consortium will have a huge influence on your ability, your probability to succeed. You have different types of organizations that can be involved: universities, research groups, SMEs, and large companies. And the balance will differ depending on the type of instruments you are targeting. Your geographical balance will also be very important. In many projects, Eastern European partners are underrepresented, and that can be to your advantage to make sure that they are included. Finally, the gender balance remains a very important topic at the European Commission, so make sure that your project team is well balanced and the profiles highlighted. One of our recommendations in our project we've been working with is to involve end users. In Horizon 2020, there is a lot of talks about agile development, end user feedback, etc. And so it requires to have these end users in the consortium if possible, or at least in a user group or an advisory board. End users are extremely important because they provide feedback to the technology which is being developed, even if it's a research stage, and they also drive the exploitation of results. So at the end of the project, they are the entities that can take on the research or the demonstrator and bring it to the next level. So this is becoming more and more important for the European Commission because they are aware of the fact that not enough projects funded under FP7 have resulted in commercial results. So building a good consortium is key. It unfortunately takes time. You need to talk to a lot of companies, and it's not only about posting a note on LinkedIn and waiting for people to connect with you. It requires a lot of active search. And as for any business development activity, we do require and request you to qualify your partners. Here we indicate a simple framework called BANT, which stands for Budget, Authority, Need, and Timeline. And really it means that when you select a partner, you should really look at the budget they will need in your project or they are requiring, their capacity of co-financing. That's particularly important for SMEs because later on you may have trouble once they go for validation and you may have to replace them during the negotiation. Authority is an important one. You're talking to someone at the company. Make sure that the person in charge of approving your project is involved as early as possible. You don't want to be 2 weeks before the deadline facing a no from the management of that company. Need is important. All the companies involved should have an interest in the output of the project. They should not do the project just because they want to get some EC money. They should, of course, do it because it's interesting for their own research purposes. And finally, timeline. The timeline of your partner should be aligned with the timeline of the project. It's not very useful for you to have a partner that has a very long research timeline if you are looking at a close-to-market project. The bulk of the effort is about writing a proposal. That is a significant effort. We usually estimate that a very good proposal will take on average 400 hours. Now you may think, well, I will not make it perfect, I will just make it good enough to get funding. Well, that will not work because only excellent applications get funded. The competition has become extremely high on these frameworks, the skill level as well, and you need to address all evaluation criteria. So you can't afford to have a weak part but try to compensate with another excellent part. All the parts of the application have to be excellent. It's also very important to make it easy for the reviewers. The capability of being concise and synthetic is often what's missing in these applications. You have a 100-page, but in general, for an FP7 application, but every single page is important. And in fact, when you look at the SME instrument, which will have in stage 1 10 pages and in stage 2 30 pages, it will be difficult because, believe me, it's a lot easier to write a very long proposal than to compact it into 10 very powerful pages. So even if the application process will take less time on average, it doesn't mean that writing a 10-page application will take 10% of the time of writing a 100-page application. Here are some frequent mistakes that we've seen over and over again. One is to start too late. There's a lot of pressure, and sometimes the consortium takes time to be put together, and as a result the writing starts very late as well. On average, you should budget 3 months before the deadline in terms of time. But it's not always possible, and if you have a more short timeline, then it's even more important for you to get external consultants on the project, because they will be able to work full-time and make sure that proposals can be done in a very short time frame. To give you an example here, in one of our applications last year, we had a customer that passed the stage 1. It was a 2-stage proposal for the environmental work program. And between stage 1 and stage 2, they only had 6 weeks to submit the full proposal. And they hadn't started at all before stage 1, because obviously they wanted to know if they were qualifying for stage 1. So we took 6 weeks. Obviously the consortium was already formed, but in 6 weeks we wrote the entire proposal. That's not very realistic to do that if you're on your own. So allow for enough time. There are also standard mistakes in writing the application. Typically, in part 1 of the application, you are stating your objectives and you need to define some key performance indicators. These tend to be very vague, and that is not good. If you are working on a technology that can improve the damping characteristic of a metallic part, so reducing the vibration, then you can't just say we'll improve the damping properties of that metallic part. It's much better to say that one of the KPIs will be that the elastic modulus of that particular part will be improved by 30%, for example. Another challenge is the state-of-the-art review, which is also part of the first section of the proposal. It's common for SMEs to not have a lot of time or resources to search through all of the prior art articles and patents. And this will not be good for the reviewer, because the reviewer needs to understand what is good, what is beyond prior art in your proposal. Therefore, we really also recommend to go for experts, external consultants to help you with that prior art review. Finally, the exploitation plan is not very good in general, because it's written by universities or research companies. And here SMEs have a key role to play, but they may not know exactly how to write it in a way that the European Commission will like. So this is something where you have to pay particular attention, especially with the new focus in Horizon 2020 on impact. So how do you start when you've never done it? Well, one area or one possibility is to join a consortium which is led by a good coordinator. But you can also use external consultants, of course, which can do that for you. The review process, this is an example for FP7. The project proposal are evaluated along 3 criteria: scientific and technological excellence, implementation, and impact. Currently, it's in this order, but in Horizon 2020, impact will actually go above implementation. Each of these criteria are marked out of 5, which gives you a mark out of 15. And of course, you need to have a very high mark to be able to get financed. So if you look at this example of an ESR, you see here that it's written very small, but you can see that the total score is 13.5 out of 15. And the evaluators also indicate that 47 projects out of 82 that have passed the threshold will get funded. So in this code, for example, it means that 250 projects have been submitted. Only 82 passed the threshold, but even out of this, only a fraction, half of them, will actually get funded. So it's not only good to pass the threshold, you need to be better than that. In fact, in this particular call, our proposal ranked number 4 out of 250. So obviously it was well positioned to receive the funding. This is a distribution of marks for a particular call. And you can see here that a lot of the marks end up in the middle, which is sort of natural, but it also has to do with the way the proposals are evaluated. The way that FP7 evaluates proposal is by a consensus of evaluators. So you have 3 to 5 experts that will gather, and you don't use the average of their marks. They actually have to agree on one mark, which will content everyone in that group of 3 or 5. As a result, this approach tends to smoothen the ultimate mark. So it skews the distribution in the middle. And the problem with that is most proposals in the 8 to 10.5 range, they are simply average, and they stand no chance of getting financed. Then above threshold, you have some good applications, which are between 11 and 12.5, but unfortunately, they most likely won't get funded because of the competition. So it's only when you reach the 13 plus area that you stand a very good chance of getting funded. Now you may have submitted a proposal already and ended up with, say, for example, 11 or 11.5. And you might think, I'm very close to getting funded. I just need to improve a little bit that proposal, 10-20% extra effort, and then I will go into the excellent applications. Well, that's not the case. If we look at the effort required to take a proposal from the good application batch to the excellent application batch, we're talking about doubling the effort. Simply because getting to that stage will require to rewrite entire parts of the application. Because you really need to convince 3 to 5 experts to give you that mark between 13 and 15. And that is a very difficult job. So keep that in mind. We've seen a consortium submitting over and over again the same proposal, hoping to improve it, and they've failed. They've always ended up with between 11 and 12. So as a conclusion, the calls have become very competitive because the skills levels have increased over time. These frameworks have been around for quite a long time. There are people specialized in writing applications in large companies, in research institutes, and even in universities. So SMEs have to go with very stiff competition. Now, of course, there are SME instruments where they are the only one that can file. But of course, these SMEs will also try to seek experts to help them write the proposal. So the skill level will also increase over time for these SME instruments. So whether you plan to file an SME instrument proposal or even a normal cooperative proposal, your time is better spent running your business. This is your job as an SME owner. And you can compete with the experts who spend all of the time doing this. Now, in most countries, there are national grants available to engage external help. Here I have 2 examples in Sweden and France. And in order to get access to the funding, you simply need to write a short description of the project application you are planning to file, the tentative consortium, and then you get a small amount of money, between 20 and 50k euro, to be able to spend the time in writing the application, traveling around Europe to meet your partners, etc. So don't hesitate to really use these schemes because they are dedicated to SMEs. They're really meant for SMEs to engage external help. There are different support options. And here at ZAS Ventures, we can show you a few of the activities we've been carrying. It starts from call monitoring, trying to identify the right calls for your technology and your skill set, and making sure that the call is aligned with your capabilities and that you are fully eligible for it. We can also support the formation of the consortium, which means not only finding the right partners in our networks, but also validating that partner. We've seen some projects almost failing because one partner turned out to be close to bankruptcy in the middle of the negotiation process. And that had not been picked up by the project coordinator at the beginning. Of course, there were some emergency meetings to replace that partner with another partner. But this is something you don't want to have to do when you are at negotiation stage. So validating the partner and understanding their co-financing capability and their financial viability in general is very important. The bulk of our work is around proposal development, and here we typically use a success fee only approach. So you only pay once you receive the financing from the Commission. There are other possible services. For example, for the consultants who are attending this webinar, we offer a proposal review service where they can submit their proposals and against a fixed fee receive a review, what we call a red team analysis of their proposal. Once the proposal has been invited to negotiation, we can also support the negotiation stage, budget and the description of work. And once the project is starting, there is a possibility to either provide project management or to run workshops around, for example, financial reporting. Here are a few examples of projects that have been delivered over the past months by ZAS Ventures. You can see here these are mostly FP7 projects. There is also one CIP. And all of these projects are now running or about to start.